Are we ready to go now? Okay, are we good to go, Amanda? Going to give me a thumbs up? Yep. Okay, cool. Right, we'll get started then. Welcome, everyone. Hello. And I hope you all are well. First of all, you know, we're now in month 3 of lockdown, and it's just incredible that you're all even here after 3 months to still show up, still have the energy to think about how after 3 months and everything we've been through, you're still here to create a positive difference and support your students as well. So real credit to you and thank you for being here today. I'm Lee, I'm the Sector Improvement Lead here at Student Minds. I head up our 2 Sector Improvement programmes, the University Mental Health Charter and Student Minds SUs, which we'll talk about in just a second. I am joined by my wonderful colleagues. If you'd all like to give a wave and show your faces, you'll get to see some of those. They'll be facilitating the breakout rooms when we get to the activity stage. And if you're joining us on YouTube, we're also live streaming this on YouTube as well. So you'll be able to kind of engage with the presentation side of things before we go on to the activity and then take that learning forward yourselves as well. Anybody can engage with us using the hashtag #SustainableHT on Twitter. If you're in the Zoom meeting, you can use the chat function to connect with each other as well. We're not going to have much time for an in-depth Q&A today, but we do encourage you to use the chat feature to introduce yourselves, to connect, share details or whatever you need to do throughout the session as well. And if you have any technical issues or need to ask us a question, do use that feature as well. Great. Well, and yeah, I first want to say a big thank you for the past couple of months. Student Minds have been listening to staff and students across the sector. We've been having multiple conversations, and I just want to say student unions have absolutely shone and really shown your value over the past few months since lockdown. You know, you've really showed up to support students and provide that real valuable connection they need to have with their university communities as well. So I just want to say thank you for your role in that. It really has been incredible. Universities too have done a lot to prioritise mental health and wellbeing, have done incredible things over the past couple of months. And today is all about, obviously we know now that universities are starting to think strategically about next year, what their provision is going to look like. We're in a really challenging, uncertain, unstable environment that they're making those decisions in. So it's about how can we work together as student unions, as us as a charity, to work with our universities to ensure that mental health and wellbeing of students remains a top priority in planning for next year. And this whole session is based on our guidance that we released 2 weeks ago called Planning for a Sustainable Future, the Importance of University Mental Health in Uncertain Times. So if I can control the slides. So today, I'll give you a brief introduction to Student Minds if you've not come across us before. Whistle-stop tour around what we mean when we say mental health, if you're not used to having these conversations. We'll also explore what we know so far about the impact of COVID-19 on the mental health of our university communities. And we'll introduce our lead model for change. So this is our campaigning model, and we'll be able to use this as a framework to base our conversations on together today, to think about how we can work with our universities to have a real positive impact on student mental health over the coming months. So we'll get together, if you're on the Zoom call, we'll have a rapid action learning set based around the lead model for change. And if you're on the YouTube live, we'll go through the model with you, and then you can take that away and use that within your teams and your student unions too. Okay, so briefly, who are Student Minds? If you've not come across us before, we are the UK's student mental health charity. We started just over a decade ago as a student-led peer support group and a student-led campaigns group. And we've really kept that kind of student-led value at the heart of everything we do since then. We have expanded since then, so we work at the sector level with student unions, universities and accommodation providers. We provide training for staff, as well as the 2 improvement schemes that I talked about before, the Mental Health Charter and the Student Union Support Programme. We create digital resources, and we're also involved in that national level, involved in research and influencing policy as well. Student Minds SUs, I wanted to give you a bit of information about that, because this is with the webinars part of this programme. So this started this year. It launched with our 11 amazing Trailblazer SUs who joined us at the very start of the programme to help shape a programme to support SUs and understand what their role is in supporting student mental health and how they can create a whole organisation approach, so to support the mental health of their staff and their student communities, as well as create change in working with their universities as well. So it's to create a real network of leaders in student mental health, and we're still looking for people to join us next year. It will be slightly adapted, the programme, based on the current situation we find ourselves in. But if you want to hear more about that and get involved, do get in touch with us after the webinar. I'd be delighted to hear from you. Okay, so I'll give you a bit of a rundown of what Student Minds have been doing since lockdown. So since March, the first thing we did was create a coronavirus resource page for students, which has links to support and resources and information that they need to support their mental health and wellbeing during the pandemic. From that, we've also been really focusing on listening to staff and students across the sector to really understand what their needs are, how they're experiencing the pandemic, and how their mental health and wellbeing has been affected. And from all that listening, we've been able to create support for students. So that's in adapting our existing student support and thinking about what resources students might need that we might need to develop specifically. We're also using that listening to understand how we can support universities and student unions to support their students too. And our guidance that we'll go through today, Planning for a Sustainable Future, and this webinar and the one next week are the first outputs of that. Also very excitingly today, literally just announced it today, so it's brand new, is Student Space, which is something funded by the Office for Students, has offered us a £3 million grant to develop a central hub for all sorts of different digital resources and support links that students can use to support them through the pandemic. And that will be built in collaboration with a number of mental health and higher education organisations from across both of those sectors. So we can't wait to kind of get that started and see how that develops and what it turns into. Really exciting. Okay, so very quickly, I thought I'd give an introduction to what mental health is. This is the model that Student Minds uses for a lot of its work. It is a model, and therefore it's not the only one. It's by no means the definition of mental health and wellbeing, but it does help us to frame our conversations today and to understand some of the concepts and some of the ways that we understand mental health and wellbeing. So previously, people might have seen mental health as being, well, one of two things. You're either mentally healthy or you have a mental illness, and there's a hard line between the two. What this shows is that actually your mental health is more likely on a continuum. So you may experience, from those who experience minimal mental health difficulties, all the way to those that are experiencing difficulties that might start to impact their life, and they might even have a diagnosis. And people can sit anywhere along this continuum and move along it along their lifetime. There's no hard line that distinguishes the two. So everybody sits somewhere on this. There is also mental well-being. So this is your general ability to manage the daily stresses and challenges that life presents to you. And you can have minimal mental well-being, where you feel like you're less able to cope, all the way up to optimal mental well-being. And you might move along this continuum on a daily or even hourly basis. And it's the same for everybody. So if you have a mental health diagnosis or you have mental health difficulties, you can have days where you're really able to cope and manage your symptoms. And if you have minimal mental health difficulties, you might similarly have days where you're just feeling like you can't cope, you're feeling like you want to withdraw, and you're experiencing negative emotions. So everybody can sit somewhere along that continuum. And the two are interrelated as well. They're not two distinct things. Low mental well-being can then eventually lead to having mental health difficulties and moving into that lower quadrant. At Student Minds, we want to be able to support and create a positive environment for everybody, no matter where they are sitting on this continuum. So we want to make sure that those that have mental health difficulties have access to real effective support to support their mental health, and that they have an environment that allows them to manage their mental well-being and their symptoms and really have a positive experience despite having mental health difficulties. And we want to make sure that those with minimal mental health difficulties are feeling as though they're able to reach the optimal mental well-being on a daily basis, and they're able to manage their mental well-being and are in an environment that supports and promotes them to have positive mental health and well-being. And that we're preventing students from getting to the point where they're moving into that lower left quadrant where they're really starting to struggle or have low mental well-being and low mental health difficulties as well. Okay, so how do we work with universities to make mental health a priority in a COVID-19 context? So we have created a campaign model called the LEAD Model for Change, and I'll go through this with you and contextualize it in thinking about the COVID-19 context as well. So the LEAD model, what is it? It's a 4-stage process. So the first one is listen. So it's important to know before we start any campaign or any journey to influence change that we really understand the needs and experiences of our populations. So what do we know about the impact of COVID-19 on student mental health and well-being? And we'll explore this a bit in a minute. The second step is empower. So what tools, support and resources do we need to be able to influence university strategy and influence that change, and making sure we have the power to create that change as well. The third is action. So what steps can we take to have a positive impact on the issues that we've identified through our listening and effectively influence those that we've identified in the empower stage as well. The third one is debrief. So not to forget to assess how do we know we've achieved our goals and what can we learn? What learning can we take from our approach that we can use to continually improve to eventually achieve and get where we want to be in achieving positive mental health for everybody. Okay, so now we're going to contextualize that 4-stage process in the context of COVID-19 and where we are currently, and thinking strategies for next year and beyond. So what do we know so far about the impact of COVID-19 on student mental health? We'll give you some insight from what we found at a national level, first of all, and I'd like to invite my colleague Gareth Hughes. He's a psychotherapist and research lead for student wellbeing at the University of Derby. He's also the co-author of the University Mental Health Charter and the guidance that we produced. He's going to go through what we know at a national level is the impact of COVID-19 on student mental health and wellbeing, and also the 7 recommendations we've made from universities that we think they need to take action on in order to prioritise mental health and wellbeing in their planning for next year. So I'll hand to you, Gareth.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So let's start with what we actually know and what within the university community. Now, the first thing I want to say is what we know at the moment is inevitably a bit partial. So we are still gathering data, we are still speaking to students, we're still listening, we're still talking to university staff. But obviously this is an unusual situation that we haven't encountered before. And we have to be very careful not to make assumptions. We have to be very careful not to think, well, it's inevitably going to be this, it's inevitably going to work like that, because we can then make mistakes and start preparing for things that don't happen, and we can miss the stuff that's actually happening that is actually really important. So what do we know? We've been doing a lot of listening. We've also been pulling together the early research that we've seen and lots of the other kind of information pieces that have been out there to help us understand what exactly is going on. The other thing that I think we need to be careful about is that we don't do what we call pathologize what's happening here, which is that we don't start taking people's normal emotional responses and treating it as if they've developed some kind of mental health problem, as Lee's been talking about there, about the fact that just because you're experiencing a difficult day, just because your mood is low, doesn't necessarily mean you have or are going to develop a mental illness. And we have to be very careful about not jumping to conclusions around all of those kinds of things. So what are we seeing in the student population overall? Well, it's a mix, and there's a real mix about different types of experiences going on. Students do generally seem to be one of the groups that's having a more difficult time during the pandemic than other parts of the population. Excuse me. So students and young people particularly, more likely to feel anxious, more likely to have an impact on hope, more likely to be self-harming during this period of time. So we are seeing some impacts on that, and particularly impacts on social isolation and loneliness. But again, it's not true of the entire population. Some students do seem to be having a good time during this. Some students feel that actually it's given them a chance to ground and to rest, and that they're learning a little bit more. Going home and connecting with family has been helpful for them. So it's a different pattern depending on the individual student, on an individual groups of students. So we have to understand this is not one overall picture. It's many pictures impacting on different students in different ways. So that's the first thing that we need to remember from all of that. Second thing out of all that is that the experience of online learning, again, seems to be different for different students. Some students reporting that they are actually enjoying it and finding that they're less distracted in lectures as a result of learning online. But again, a big chunk of students saying they're finding online learning difficult. They're finding it difficult to extract learning and extract meaning from online lectures, and that this is having a negative impact on their motivation overall. Their motivation is dropping as a result. One of the other big factors that we're seeing impacting, again, unevenly on the student population is whether or not students have private space. So students having private space to learn in, so just to simply engage in learning and to actually be able to concentrate, or some students who are maybe sharing bedrooms with siblings and don't have quiet space and are competing for maybe the laptop or whatever. And secondly, students struggling to get private space to engage with services such as counselling. So students not able to have a counselling appointment because there's nowhere private at home where they can have that kind of conversation without somebody else overhearing them. There's then a big concern, obviously, lots of our students, particularly our final year students, having about, well, what does this mean for my future? And a sense of imposter syndrome for some of our students, that my degree isn't going to count as a proper degree. Employers aren't going to look at me as a proper graduate. I've not done the final piece of work. That's having a bit of an impact and a bit of a concern, which runs then into fears about what this is going to mean for their whole future. And from our perspective here today, what's really important is that what universities are doing seems to have a very clear effect on the well-being and mental health of their students during this period of time. So let me give you one piece of research which is showing that. So there's a piece of research done by the Smarten Network looking at postgraduate research students, so students doing doctorate study mainly, and their well-being, and looking at what they found, what universities had done. And where universities had communicated clearly to them, their supervisors had been in touch, they felt supported, and they understood what was going to happen and what they needed to do, those students' well-being was better. Where students felt like they didn't know what was going on, the university hadn't communicated, they hadn't heard from their supervisor, they felt a bit lost, their well-being was lower. So what universities do in this space really matters. Can we flick on to the next slide, please? So as I said earlier on, there's a broad impact here in terms of different students depending on who they are, where they are, and what else is going on in their lives. So there's obviously been a big financial hit for some of our students, those who are relying on part-time jobs for income and who maybe have children and who are caring. Big impact, big uncertainty, big concerns for them just in terms of being able to cope financially. Other students who maybe, for instance, care leavers or estranged students who haven't had home to go back to, who have been living in halls of residence, potentially on their own and isolated. And then a range of, I'm not going to go through all of them, but a range of other students, a sharper pain, more of an impact on their well-being as a result of COVID-19 and the lockdown. So we need to be conscious of the fact that this isn't one experience overall, and that we may need to be thinking about different parts of our communities and the specific support that they might need to help them through this period. And if we can flick on again, please. So that takes us to our 7 key asks in planning for a sustainable future. So these are the asks that we're making to universities right now in terms of what we think they need to be doing in order to make sure that they're giving the best possible response and support for the well-being of their students and their staff and their communities as a whole. So let's flick on again, please. Now, all of this is based on the evidence that we have been gathering in the last few months and all of the evidence that we gathered to put together the University Mental Health Charter. Hopefully you'll all be aware of the Charter. If you're not, please do go onto the Student Minds site and read it. It is a long document. You might want to do it in chunks, but it covers every aspect of university life, because we know that every aspect of university life impacts on the well-being and mental health of students and of staff. Click on for me, please. So what the evidence clearly shows from all kinds of research into student mental health is that our environment, the culture in which we find ourselves, the people around us, the activities we engage in, how we think and how we behave, all have an impact on how we feel, so on our mental health and on our well-being. So we need to think about the physical, cultural, social, and personal aspects of the lives that students are leading overall. And what that means is that every university in the country already has a whole university approach to mental health, but some of it will be really well thought through and will be having a positive impact. Some of it might not be that well thought through and will therefore be having a negative impact. And what we want to get universities to do through this period and ever after is to think about the well-being of students and staff in all of the decisions that they make, in all of their planning and in all of their thinking. So what we've tried to do is to take that kind of template from the charter and apply it to this specific moment, to think about what it is that we need to do for students, particularly through the COVID-19 pandemic and lockdown. Click on again, please. So we've broken this down across the domains of the charter, and the first of these domains is learning. Now, we know that well-being and mental health impact on students' ability to engage in learning and their overall academic achievement. So if you have poor mental health, it's much more difficult for you to concentrate, to focus, to perform academically to your ability. What we also know with that is that your engagement with your an impact on your mental health and well-being, so that it goes in the other direction as well. So if you think about what happens when students maybe get a bad mark back in an exam or a piece of work, that obviously can drop down their mood. But equally, we know that if you're engaged in learning in a meaningful way, if you think it's relevant, if you care about it personally, and if you feel good at it, if you feel confident, if you feel competent, if you believe that you're going to do well and be successful, that can also have a positive impact on your well-being. So there's a relationship going in two ways. So we want universities to be thinking about, as we move into this probably blended or maybe online learning that happens next year, how are we going to be supporting student learning? How are we going to be making sure that students are equipped to learn in the online space, that they know what to do, that they have the opportunity to learn in a way that makes sense, and that the transition into university, however it happens, is well thought through and that students are supported into it. Now, that's not just first year students, second year students, third year and postgraduate students as well. How are universities supporting their transition back into university next semester? And also then thinking about the transition back onto campus for everybody when that happens, that's not an afterthought, that we're planning for it in advance and making sure that those transitions are really well thought through and that we induct and orient everyone back onto campus when we're able to do that properly. Click on, please, Lee. So the second aspect of this then is support. The support that's available for students when they need it. If students start experiencing problems with their well-being or with their mental health, what support is there to help them? And what we want to make sure is that in every university, the support services are safe, that they're effective, so that they actually help when students go to them, that they're accessible, so that all students can actually access the support when they need it, that it has the resource that it needs for the context that it's in, that the services have actually been adapted to the university and the students who are there, and that it's well governed, that it's well managed so that we can be confident about the type of support that it's providing. Now, support services have had to do a huge amount of work in the last few months to transfer what they've been doing online. So counselling services have moved online very quickly, and they've done a fantastic job in that. But we want to make sure that they're properly supported into the next semester and then again back onto semester afterwards. And OFS have been very clear in saying universities should be planning for an increase in demand on their services, that they should expect to see more need from students because that looks like what's coming through the early evidence. So we need to make sure that universities are sustaining their investment in their support services, that the support are being properly resourced, that they're being managed well, and that we make sure that they are accessible to all students as much as possible, if that's online, like in the online space, but then back on campus when we get back to that. Click online again for me, please. Now, the other aspect of all this is about staff. So we are as interested in staff mental health and well-being as we are in students. Now, there's a number of reasons for that. First of all, because university staff are entitled to good well-being and mental health as much as anyone else. But we also know that staff mental health and well-being impacts on student mental health and well-being as well. So we want to make sure that staff are looked after in this space so that when they come in September, October of the first semester, they have the energy and the resource and the capacity to be able to teach well and to support our students well, and to give students the experiences that they need. Because if staff are burnt out, they're less likely to be able to do that. So again, we want to make sure that staff are properly supported to do the work that they need to do and to be able to teach well online and support well online if that's what they're having, and being given the opportunity to rest and look after their well-being as well. Click on again for me, please. And then in the live domain, there are two specific things that we want to pick out. So the first of these is that we really need to be making sure that we are building community next year, that we are ensuring that students can feel that sense of belonging, that they are able to make friends, that they are able to feel that they belong to something bigger than themselves, that they are a part of their university, because that's a really important part of being a student. And it also seems to be an important part of being successful at university. Students who feel that they belong to their university, much more likely to be academically successful. Now, obviously, that's going to be a bit of a challenge, and we need to be careful that student unions aren't being handed the job of managing this by themselves, because that's not fair. This has to be a partnership between student unions and their university to build that community and provide those social opportunities that students are going to need. And we also need to be aware of the needs of students in university accommodation, that they aren't being neglected, they aren't being forgotten about, that universities have thought through how that's going to work, how students are going to be kept safe, and different aspects like, if one of their flatmates does go down ill with COVID-19, how are the flatmates going to be supported? How is the student going to be supported if they're having to isolate within the flat, and all of that kind of thing. So making sure, now lots of universities are doing all of this thinking, by the way. This isn't me saying that universities aren't thinking about this and aren't engaged with it. Lots and lots of them are having these conversations and are making these plans. But we think these are the things that are important and that we need to make sure they definitely are focused on. Click on for me again, please. And then in our enabling things section, there are two particular things we're pulling out. One is co-production, so that we want universities to be thinking in the planning that universities are doing. We want them to be thinking about how they work with students and how they work with staff to make sure that what they are doing actually meets the needs of their students and their staff, that they are not making assumptions, as I was talking about right at the very beginning. We need to make sure that students and student unions are involved in that decision making, that they're involved in that planning, and they aren't just picking it up afterwards. And the second thing is we need to make sure that the decisions that we're making, that they're thinking about everyone within our whole university community, because as I said earlier, this is impacting differently on different groups of students. So we have to be planning for that and thinking about, well, what are the specific things that specific groups of students are likely to need? What are the specific barriers that some students are going to be experiencing? And if we do that, then hopefully what we can do is we can give the whole university population the experience, the best possible experience that we can, the enjoyment of student, the thrill of learning, the excitement of learning, and also that we can support the well-being and mental health of all students and all staff, so that everyone can come through this period, re-emerge back on campus when we're ready, and feel that they've had a really good experience of being at university and that they've been able to grow and flourish and learn through this whole experience. So those are our asks. That's where it's all being drawn from. And that's what we'll be discussing in the breakout rooms in a little bit moment. And I think I'm handing back to you then, Lee.
Thanks, Gareth. Excellent. So a lot of information there. And as I say, that's we do suggest go reading the guidance and the charter if you want to dive into some of those things in more detail. All the evidence that supports all of that is all there. Lots of it academically supported, which is great when you're trying to convince universities to make change as well. So yeah, do go and dive into that into some more detail. So that's the national picture. So we're back to this, the first stage in our campaigns process, the listening. And that's the national picture. That's how students nationally are understanding and experiencing COVID-19 on their mental health and wellbeing, and the things that we think universities need to be doing across the board, no matter which context you're in, to support good mental health and wellbeing. Now it's over to you to think about how does that sit in your own communities. So what are the needs and experiences of your particular student body? You might want to think about what you know already about your student community if you've not been able to engage a lot with them over the past couple of months. You know, what do you know about their makeup and their general needs and the kind of challenges and barriers that they face? What listening have you been doing over the past few months, and evidence have you got there about the specific challenges that they've been facing during COVID-19? If you have an advice centre, they're a really useful resource to understand what issues students have been presenting. The same with sabbatical officers as well, might have some great insight about the general queries that are asked of them. So really use what you've got and what you've already got there in terms of the past few months and what you know about what students have been experiencing. And then think, how can you better understand their experiences? So we've got the evidence now, but that their experiences may change as the situation is changing daily now. And when they come back next year, they may start experiencing things differently again, and other unique challenges, unforeseen challenges might arise. So how can you better work to understand their experiences and use that as a basis for working with your university as well? And then think about, so we've set out our 7 key asks that we think are really important for any university, but what specific asks do you have of your university? What do they really need to prioritise? There might be something specific. Maybe you have a large Black student population who are experiencing unique difficulties at this time. Do you need a specific thing in there about how they need to approach that strategically as well? Okay, so second part of our lead model is empower. So thinking about what do we need, what tools, resources and support do we need to be able to influence university strategy as student unions? And it's worth doing a bit of a mapping process at this point. So who has the power to make change in your university? Is it a senior leader? Is it your support services team? Start to think about, what do they value? What really makes them tick? What are they using to make these decisions, and what are they basing those on? What strengths do you have to be able to influence them? So, you know, do you have incredible insight into what your students need and want and what their experiences are, and how can that be used as a tool to influence change? And what might the barriers be there? What might be difficult to influence them around? And who are your allies as well? You know, who can you draw on around in the community who will help you work with that decision maker to make some change? So as with the listening, we've done a bit of that work already for you that you can kind of draw on and use as a basis. So we know that senior leaders at universities will often be making these big strategic decisions about what the provision will look like next year and beyond. And the first thing to say is that they do care about mental health and wellbeing. I don't think I've met a leader of a university yet who said that they couldn't care less about student mental health. It's definitely something that they personally care about and prioritise. So we should never come into these conversations assuming they would never want to make the changes we're asking for. However, they're in a very tricky situation currently, and they're facing a lot of uncertainty. We still don't know. We still don't have a lot of government guidance around how universities should operate in September or beyond that. They're also facing a lot of financial uncertainty. So there's a lot. I mean, as you can see on the right-hand side here, and there's a lot of media coverage already saying, you know, estimates from 760 million all the way to a couple of £billion across the sector that's going to be shortfalled because of their inability to recruit students next year. And some are already starting to think about some of those more serious decisions they're going to have to make in order to just make their university exist this time next year. So making staff cuts, pausing fixed-term contracts and so on as well, which no leader wants to be in a position where they're making those decisions, but you have to make it based on the survival of your university. So although they may care about mental health and wellbeing, we do understand that they're in this really difficult situation currently. And they've got a lot of competing priorities and are facing a kind of existential crisis almost. But having said that, what we do know is that mental health, this is fully evidence-based, it's all there. It improves the main key performance indicators. that senior leaders in universities are aiming for and work towards. We know it improves student learning, as Gareth says. If you have good mental health, you're able to learn and engage with the material. It improves retention, so your dropout rates are really important for universities, not just because it helps your income, but as well as one of those key performance indicators. Student attainment and performance is better when everybody's their well-being and mental health is positive. And employability outcomes, we know that those who are more resilient, more have positive mental health and well-being, generally have better employability outcomes too. And that's all evidence-based, which you can see in our guidance and in the University Mental Health Charter as well. So this is something that universities should be paying attention to if they're thinking about their future survival. Similarly with staff, we know that staff are currently facing an increased workload and having to adapt to an online environment and change courses and put curriculum online and so on. What we don't want is staff to be burnt out completely by September, because as we said, transition is a really key point, and that's going to be a really key point in supporting student mental health. And they'll be implementing a lot of those changes as well. So it's pointless to have a staff workforce, a labour force that just can't operate at that time. And it's important in itself, but in terms of how thinking about university sustainability and whether they have a future, it's increasingly important to ensure that staff are able and feel motivated and are able to cope with their work and implement those changes, and support students as well. They're a key point of contact for students. So with all this, we in our guidance, the whole thing is framed with the key argument, the key line, that if you're thinking about securing a sustainable future for your university, it's having a healthy, happy community that's going to get you there, not the financial bottom line. So we understand you're dealing with a lot of financial pressures at the moment, but if you care about your future, then mental health is up there as one of your key priorities. So this is an argument you can take as well and use and build on in your conversations with your universities as well. So that's empower. And then the last 2 points in the LEAD model are action. So how can we positively impact the issues identified through our listening? How can we, what are the key asks, like we said in the listening, and what can we do to ensure that those key asks become a reality? What are our tactics? Think about what's worked well in the past. You'll have all done campaigns previously before, and this is a great opportunity if you're in a Zoom call to learn from one another, hear about others' experiences and what's worked well for them as well. And then you want to be doing the implementation of the action before the next step, which is debrief. So keeping an eye, even at this early stage, in thinking about how you will know when you've achieved your goals. This helps you to define some really clear key asks as well, where you will be able to tell if you've achieved them or not. Think of that kind of SMART objectives, which is really, really helpful, as well as remembering to provide that space at key points throughout the year to come back and review where have we got in terms of our goals, what's worked well, what's not worked well, and how can we feed that learning into either progressing towards those goals over the next few months, or use that learning to think about further campaigns and other work that we do as well. So that's a really, really important and often quite forgotten aspect of campaigning as well. Okay, so that's enough from our presentation, and then we wanted to spend the rest of the session, if you're on the Zoom call, as like a rapid action learning set where you can get into groups and start to think through some of these ideas together. It's a really opportunity to start thinking, okay, how do we do this where I am? How do other people do these things? Is there any learning we can do from each other? What's worked well before? What are the key challenges? And start to build an idea for how you might start to approach this campaign and influencing your universities together. If you are on the YouTube live, we'll stop in a second, but I do encourage you to take away the learning today and use that as a basis, either on your own or with your teams, to start thinking about building up a campaign for the future, if this is something you want to prioritise for the coming months. So those of you that are on the Zoom call, we will split up in a second. We want to go through listening, so think about together what do you currently know about your student experiences, where might there be gaps, and how can you better understand the student experiences. What are other people doing to really build that knowledge and evidence base? Empower, start to think about who has the power to make change in your university. What do they value? What strengths do you have together to build on and influence them? Where might the barriers be? What are the key challenges that you have when you're having those conversations with universities? And who are your allies? You know, think we've got each other today, and think about how we can build on that. And who else might we be able to reach out to? Support services, for example. We obviously care about being well resourced over the coming months, and so they might be an example of a good ally. Action, start to think about how you might be able to positively impact change. What are your tactics? Has anybody got any case studies where things have worked well in the past? Do share and learn from each other as well. And debrief. So how will you know you've achieved your goal? If you get to that point today, I know there's a lot there to go through, but yes, that might be good to consider as well, or afterwards. If you're on the Zoom call, just a reminder not to worry. We are broadcasting on YouTube Live, but the breakout rooms will not be recorded on that webinar. So do feel free to be as open as you would like to be in those breakout rooms with your groups. And we'll take notes as well, each of the facilitators, and we'll be able to provide a summary. So we'll come back here. We won't share too much around what other conversations have been happening, but we'll provide a summary of the general feel of the conversations that have been had today after this webinar. So those of you on the YouTube Live as well will be able to access that. So what time are we on now? 2:45, so we'll come back here at 3:25 for a quick wrap up, but the rest of the time is yours to really have a constructive conversation there. So if you're on the YouTube Live, it's bye from me, and hopefully that was helpful. Please do get in touch, and if you're on the Zoom call, I will see you in the breakout rooms.